Welcome to Chiropractic Science, where you get to hear interviews with leading chiropractic researchers from around the world. Hear about chiropractic research from the authors in plain English, not through the media nor a middleman. My name is Dr. Dean Smith, and I am the host of Chiropractic Science. I am a clinical professor in the Department of Kinesiology and Health at Miami University, and I'm also a chiropractor in Eaton, Ohio. My research interests relate to understanding how chiropractic affects motor control and human performance. Today, I have the privilege of interviewing Dr. Michael Meier. But before we get to the interview, I wanted to thank all of you who have subscribed to Chiropractic Science, and I'm especially appreciative to all of you who have contributed 5-star reviews on iTunes. iTunes really helps others find out about chiropractic science. So, if you like the show, please take a second and write a review. It will support chiropractors everywhere. Here is a review from Raffle G, who says, "Wow, now that is a great podcast. Very good quality, science-based for clinicians and researchers. I'm an osteopathy student in Europe, and I love listening to this podcast. It's like listening to The Drive, which I also like, but in the field of manual medicine. Great work." Well, thank you, Raffle G, for your review, and I look forward to sharing your iTunes review in a future podcast. Please consider making a contribution to Chiropractic Science to keep these podcasts going. You can do so on our website either by making a donation or purchasing the evidence-based patient education slides presentation at chiropracticscience.com. All right, on to the podcast. Well, let's get on to the interview with Dr. Michael Meier. Dr. Michael Meier is a senior pain researcher and group leader at the Department of Chiropractic Medicine at the University of Zurich. He received his master's degree in neuropsychology and his doctorate in cognitive neuroscience from the University of Zurich, focusing on the processing of pain and nociception in the brain. In 2019, he received a grant from the Swiss National Science Foundation, or SNF, to study the role of movement behavior and cortical processes in the development and persistence of low back pain. A hallmark of his work is linking research from different disciplines such as biomechanics, neuroscience, and psychology, shedding light on novel interacting pathomechanisms underlying persistent low back pain, whose pathoanatomical cause is often unclear. Well, Dr. Meier, thanks so much for coming on the Chiropractic Science podcast.
Well, Dean, thanks a lot for having me. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. I think we're going to have some fun because a lot of this research that you're doing is just really cool, cutting edge stuff. And frankly, I think clinicians around the world really need to know about and get a better understanding of the kind of work that you're doing. And as a researcher that has followed your work for a number of years, I'm just really pumped up to have you on. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much for reading our research papers and your interest in our research.
Absolutely. So first, Dr. Meier, I'd like to, again, thank you for all your great research and the work that your group's been doing. And I wonder if you could tell us now, you're at the Department of Chiropractic Medicine at the University of Zurich. So how did you get there to this chiropractic medicine department, and what kind of stuff are you up to now?
Okay, yeah. So, as a young guy, based on my interest for IT and computers, I started first to study business informatics, and a coincidence had led to, let's say, a brutal change in direction regarding my studies. Namely, I attended a lecture of Professor Lucienke at the University of Zurich. And Lucienke is a neuropsychologist and is known for his groundbreaking work regarding functional plasticity of the human brain. And his lectures were so entertaining and the topic was so fascinating for me that I decided to terminate my studies in business informatics and start with psychology with a special interest in neuroimaging. So I've then touched the pain research area during my master's and was fascinated about the complex interplay between emotion, nociception, and pain. In particular, the ability of our brain to suppress pain by top-down modulation of nociceptive input. And as a consequence, my master thesis was about pain, more specifically about brain mechanisms of dental pain using functional magnetic resonance imaging. And yeah, you may ask now, why dental pain? The reason is quite simple, because it's a very suitable model to investigate brain mechanisms underlying pain processing, because the tooth pulp has a lot of the so-called A delta fibers, which are responsible for this very pure, sharp pain sensation. And so we developed, during my PhD studies, we developed a MR-compatible splints with embedded electrodes, but also other stimulators, which were able to apply very cold air to the teeth to, let's say, torture the people in the MR scanner to investigate cortical pain mechanisms related to dental pain and relief.
Wow.
And I completed my PhD in this area, which was also supported by GlaxoSmithKline. And after my PhD, I stayed as a postdoc at the Center of Dental Medicine, further pursuing those projects. And this was the time where I came in contact with Professor Kim Humphreys and Sabina Hotz from the Department of Chiropractic Medicine at the Walgers University Hospital. Just as a short note, the Walgers University Hospital in Zurich is an academic hospital focusing on musculoskeletal disorders, and the Integrated Chiropractic Medicine Clinic provides chiropractic care to a broad patient population. So it was Kim Humphreys who offered me a postdoc position there to establish a functional MRI paradigm to investigate brain responses to back stimulation, for example, based on anterior-posterior pressure on different segments. And at this time, functional MRI was still, or it is still, a very sexy research area, and almost nothing was now known about brain mechanisms underlying spinal manipulation or mobilization. And also during this time, and still the functional MR research area was advancing very fast. So new methods were integrated, such as machine learning and other pattern recognition methods. And together with Kim Humphreys and Sabina Hotz, we published some interesting findings together. But I also realized sooner or later that we are not able to capture the bigger picture by only looking at the brain, in particular when exploring potential novel beta mechanisms related to low back pain, in particular non-specific low back pain. And also at this time, it was a coincidence that I've met my current project partner, Stefan Schmid, from the University of Applied Sciences in Bern, Switzerland. And the collaboration with him has led to a fusion of movement science and biomechanics with my expertise in neuroimaging, which has formed the basis for the projects we are doing now, namely to investigate the role of movement behavior and cortical mechanisms in the development and persistence of low back pain. So today I'm working as a PI at the Integrative Spinal Research Group at the Department of Chiropractic Medicine, which is headed by Petra Schweinhardt, who has a strong international background in pain research. And our team is continuously growing with diverse backgrounds such as psychology, epidemiology, cognitive neuroscientists, and movement scientists, with the main goal to unravel the neurophysiological and biomechanical mechanisms of chiropractic intervention.
Wow, that was an amazing overview. Thanks for that, Dr. Meier. That was terrific. And You were talking about the teeth, and my teeth still hurts a little bit just from listening to what you did to those poor teeth.
They
Oh,
received financial compensation for this.
oh, that's good to know.
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome. So is it full-time research that you're doing? Do you have any teaching as a part of your job?
Yes, but it's not the main part of my work. So I help in pain courses organized by the University of Zurich, and I organize the internal research colloquium at the Department of Chiropractic Medicine, where the chiropractic students present their master theses. But that's it. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. So I'm sure, a lot of people listening are practitioners, and I think there's curiosity about what does, research look like. So I'm just curious. I'll just ask you this for the sake of other people probably, but what does a typical day in your life look like?
Well, that's a good question because I think there's no typical day, as this might be the case for most researchers, right? So I'm my most unvarying activity in the morning is maybe toothbrushing. So I have the privilege of being involved at several levels of the daily research cycle. So I'm involved in very basic administrative things such as organizing the appointments of our study subjects, healthy controls, but also low back pain patients, documenting according to good clinical practice, ethic proposals, and a big chunk of my work is also data acquisition. So in particular, functional MRI data, as we have quite a complex setup. I'm sure we will have some time to talk about this further. And also MR analysis. And of course, directing my little research team. So I have a postdoc and two very, very good research assistants, but also supervising master and doctoral students, a bit teaching, and also grant and manuscript writing. So that's it basically.
That's a lot. That's a lot of stuff for sure. So we'll start to dive in here in just a second into your publications and learn more about your work. And I have to say, you have a lot of great publications and in excellent journals. And as you mentioned, your work is bridging a lot of fields such as pain research, cognitive neuroscience, movement behavior. And I think that's why I ultimately got really fascinated in your research, because you're trying to bridge concepts together that I think really need to be bridged. And there's still many gaps that appear in the literature. So I thank you for that, and your team for the interest in doing that. So I wonder, maybe the best thing to do, since you gave us a pretty good overview of some of the topics that interest you, perhaps we can just dive into some of your papers. And the first one is identifying motor control strategies and their role in low back pain across disciplinary approach, bridging neurosciences with movement biomechanics. And for anybody unfamiliar with your work, I think this is a really neat paper. It's in Frontiers in Pain Research. So perhaps you could just guide us through this overview paper about what it is you're studying, and maybe some of the key research topics that you think really need to be tackled in this field.
Yeah, well, so as you mentioned, I fully agree with you. So there are important knowledge gaps, especially in musculoskeletal pain research, which need to be filled. And so in this Frontiers paper, it's a perspective paper. We describe a novel cross-disciplinary approach connecting methods from neuroscience and biomechanics. So people move differently in pain. That's clear, but the mechanisms underlying pain, injury, and movements are surprisingly unclear. So based on prior observations, which demonstrated a relationship between movement and low back pain, mainly a Dutch research group headed by Jaap van Dien, but also others developed a theoretical framework describing a spectrum of very individual movement adaptations, so-called motor control strategies, among a spectrum. So with the two endpoints, tight control and loose control. And so, for example, a tight control strategy is suggested to be associated with increased muscle co-contraction, more rigid movement patterns, but less sensory input, for example. And on the other side, we have the loose control strategy, which is associated or suggested to be associated with decreased paraspinal muscle excitability, which might come at the cost of decreased spinal stability. And of course, people move differently in pain. We all move differently in pain because we want to protect our back from further pain and injury. So for tissue health in the short term, this might be beneficial. But there are studies or literature points into the direction that if those motor control strategies persist in the long term, they can lead to negative consequences on supraspinal and spinal levels. So, for example, a tight control strategy, which is associated with increased muscle co-contraction, rigid movement patterns, might also lead to less variable sensory input, and this might lead to cortical reorganization processes, in particular in the sensory motor cortex, but also to persistently increased or altered muscle activity patterns, which might lead to muscle fatigue due to stereotypical muscle activation, but also increased tissue loading, which might finally advance disc degeneration. But as I mentioned, this is still a theoretical framework, so those mechanisms are far from clear, in particular their interaction. And in this perspective paper, we ask some relevant, let's say also clinically relevant research questions, such as, do such loose tight motor control strategies exist? Or do other motor control strategies exist? And what's their relationship to important outcomes such as low back pain intensity, disability, and psychological factors? And on the supraspinal level, there's almost no systematic evidence about the representation of the back. So we know a lot about other extremities, such as the fingers, hands, their representation in the brain, and how they change during pain or based on everyday activities, but we almost know nothing about the representation of the back, in particular if there is a topographic organization along the thoracolumbar axis. And that's also, in this cross-disciplinary approach, also a second aim to establish such cortical maps of paraspinal sensory input to test to test for potential associations between these map representations and potentially dysfunctional motor control strategies that we observe in the movement lab. So we use, on the brain level, we use, or our approach is to use functional magnetic resonance imaging with high resolution to establish cortical maps of the back representation. And on the motor behavior part, we use spine kinematics and biomechanical modeling to identify those motor control strategy phenotypes.
This is great. Okay. Yeah. I appreciate you going through that. You know, the clinician in me always wants to try to figure out a way to bring this into the clinic and try to help people out. And your description of that tight control strategy or rigid control strategy, you know, really, I think typifies quite a few people that have back pain. Certainly not everybody. Some people seem to have a different strategy as they manage their back pain. They may have a little bit more loose, but there's plenty of people, especially in acute pain, who would have this more rigid, stiff co-contraction type of manifestation in their behavior as what you're talking about. And I'm also interested in if you could just maybe from your perspective give the listener perhaps some ideas of how you might be able to incorporate this sort of cross-disciplinary perspective into practices. So is it something where, do you think we can get some of this just from a primitive gait observation, just like visually looking at the way people move? Or can we measure things like reaction time or movement time in the office, that sort of thing? Like, what do you think we can observe? And I guess I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's an important question. It's a relevant question. And I'm afraid that I can not give a satisfactory answer to it yet. The reason for this is that I think we are still in an early stage, let's say at the early stage of translational research, which should at the end produce, as you say, meaningful, applicable results that directly benefit human health. So, for example, if you look at motor control exercises, which aim to restore a coordinated and efficient use of the muscles that support the spine, studies investigating the effect of motor control exercises show often low effect sizes. So the reason for this might be indeed the existence of very individual specific motor control strategies, which points towards the need of personalized treatment approach, right? But as mentioned, I think we are still in a basic research stage. We have to systematically test if such motor control phenotypes exist and to evaluate their role in low back pain. So with our approach, I think we can contribute to this research as we aim to extract meaningful features from different potential low back pain contributors, such as psychological factors, biomechanics, and brain mechanisms. And the exciting part here is that with combining these features, for example, in a prediction model by using machine learning, we might actually identify their predictive power, meaning which features or combinations of features are relevant for the persistence of low back pain. And yeah, this takes some time as we need to acquire a lot of data in healthy subjects and low back pain patients. However, I'm quite optimistic regarding the identification of interesting and clinically relevant results that could be translated into clinical practice in the near future.
Yeah, terrific. And it just makes me think that there are some clinicians out there who have a little bit of research savviness to them, and they may be able to contribute to the literature and describing perhaps how people move in different pain situations, and perhaps even helping us as researchers to really nail down where this variability comes in. Because you're right. I think part of the issue is that a major part is that we learn these strategies, and like you say, they can become ingrained over time, and then they'll have manifestations at a cortical level or a supraspinal level that are going to have consequences ultimately on our behaviors. And I just find it so fascinating that over time, these patterns, I guess another big question is, when does this adaptive sort of stiffening strategy or rigid strategy become maladaptive? At what point is it, go from good to bad, so to speak? It's interesting. I don't know.
Really relevant questions. And I think that's also the reason why we try to recruit patients with different symptom durations to get a picture when these motor control phenotypes get maladaptive, right? And for this, we also need not only crossover studies, but also longitudinal studies, right?
Totally. I'm just curious. Have you seen people with, wildly different strategies who have low back pain? And I don't know. I just, to me in practice, sometimes I see somebody who says they're in a ton of pain, but then I look at their movements and I think, wow, this is so much different than the last person that I saw. It just amazes me sometimes the extreme differences.
Absolutely. I think there's a great variability regarding these motor control adaptations. And sorry, I meant cross-sectional studies, not crossover studies.
I got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. So let's go on to another study. And this was, these are all fascinating studies. So I'm just excited to be having this conversation. But the next one was in JMPT, and it's called Neural Responses of Posterior to Anterior Movement on Lumbar Vertebrae, a Functional Magnetic Resonance Imaging Study. So you mentioned that you're using fMRI to study the brain and what happens under pain and with these movement adaptations. So I wonder if you could tell us about what you did in this paper for us.
Yeah, of course. So the background is that increasing evidence shows that supraspinal processes, brain processes related to sensory motor processing might play a crucial role in persistence of low back pain, beside dysfunction of the musculoskeletal system, for example. So this one was one of the rare studies investigating the cortical representation of paraspinal sensory input using a clinical relevant stimulus. So healthy subject lied in prone position in the MR scanner, while a manual therapist applied controlled anterior-posterior pressure to different lumbar segments, namely L1, L3, L5, in a randomized order. And here, one of the main challenges for us was to limit head motion, because pressure stimuli can induce a lot of unwanted head motion. Unwanted because head motion can seriously affect fMRI data quality. And yeah, the results were in line with, let's say, earlier work of Painfield and colleagues, the neurosurgeon, which created this the sensory homunculus and the motor homunculus. So our results were in line because we observed some medial activation in the primary somatosensory cortex during those pressure stimuli. And further work, and that's also what we aim for in future studies, is to explore this in more detail. In particular, first to establish detailed cortical maps of thoracolumbar afferent input, and second to test potential associations between those maps and potential movement strategies. As I mentioned, we identify in the movement lab experiments. Yes.
Is there anything unique about this posterior to anterior pressure that the therapist is applying to the spine versus maybe just touching lightly over the paraspinal muscles or something like that? Is there anything unique to what we're doing, or is it just give us an idea that something's going on in the brain?
Yeah, I think there is a difference regarding between light touch and more pressure, because I think we stimulate, or with the increasing pressure, I also think that we stimulate muscle spindles, and the muscle spindles are the main proprioceptors in our body. So I think we might tackle also muscle spindle activity by applying or by increasing the pressure in comparison to light touch.
Okay, and that brings me to my next point and question, and And that is that in other papers, you had talked about factors contributing to motor control adaptations and low back pain, and that they've been pretty extensively studied on the motor output side, but much less attention is being paid to the sensory input side, specifically proprioception. And when it comes to chiropractic research, a big theoretical point is that what chiropractors do is really to stimulate afferent neurons, particularly from proprioceptors. And I guess the thought is that can contribute to better outcomes in terms of pain as well as human movement. So I'm just curious, I know that your group is really interested in this, studying the proprioceptive part of things. So maybe we could just have a brief discussion about that.
Yes, this is important because as we know, the functioning of the sensory system, especially proprioceptive function, is crucial for appropriate motor control. And today we know that the muscle spindles, which are embedded in the muscle belly, in the so-called interfusal fibers, play a major role in proprioceptive signaling. So evidence shows that the muscle spindles are the main proprioceptors in our body, as mentioned, and I do assume here that chiropractic intervention, in particular spinal manipulation, has an effect on the activity of paraspinal muscle spindles, as it has been already shown in animal models, for example. So through manipulating proprioceptive input, spinal manipulation might have an effect on motor control and therefore motor behavior. And I think one of the current challenge is that we can't directly measure or isolate proprioceptive function in humans. There are some indirect measures of, let's say proxy measures of proprioceptive function in humans, such as measuring the repositioning error, or measures such as the threshold to detect passive motion, or also balance control measures using a force plate to assess possible sway, for example. I think here it would make sense to develop methods which are able to test proprioceptive function in a more direct way in humans. And a promising example here is using vibration as vibrotactile stimulation with frequencies about 80 hertz has been shown to be a potent stimulus for modulating muscle spindle activity.
Yeah, that's really fascinating to think about using that as some sort of control or other group to put up against, let's say, an adjustment or any other treatment for that matter. That would be just fascinating to look at. Now, I know I've been reading over the last few years about this idea of brain smudging that seems to happen with pain. And it's not my area of research, but my understanding is that what happens in the cortex is that we essentially, when the pain stimulus comes on, it seems to we'll say disrupt or create some dysfunction within the hemispheres. And so I wonder if you could maybe just talk about that. And do you think if this research on proprioception and adding afferent input, do you think that could somehow disrupt possibly this brain smudging that occurs?
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting question. So, yeah, smudging is a term that is often used to describe the loss, let's say, the loss of discrete cortical organization of sensory input or motor output. Maybe I can give you here a good example. There was a nice study of Henry Zhao and Paul Hodges some years ago, where they investigated the cortical motor organization of different paraspinal muscles. So the assumption here is that we have a differential, or let's say a topographic organization along the motor cortex of different muscles. such as the multifidus or erector spinae, for appropriate fine-grade control of our paraspinal muscles. And using TMS, so transcranial magnetic stimulation, they observed that the cortical motor representation is changed in low back pain patients compared to healthy controls. More specifically, low back pain patients demonstrated an overlap of the multifidus and erectors spinae muscles in the motor cortex, which points to a loss of discrete cortical organization. And this is what is meant with smudging. So also based on their results, they concluded that training of differential activation of paraspinal muscles might be necessary to restore optimal function.
That's fascinating. So that brings us full circle back to this rigid control versus non-rigid versus variability. And it seems that like that variability is so important. Well, at least it would seem. I'm making that hypothesis because I don't know if that's true, but based upon what you just said, I would predict now that having that variability would be key to preventing this smudging phenomenon.
Absolutely, yes. Variability and differential movement of the paraspinal muscles. I agree.
So maybe that's where the adding, manipulating chiropractic type of manipulation would add this afferent proprioceptive input and potentially break the cycle, if you will, of somebody who's in that rigid control strategy, or maybe just be one stimulus to go in that right direction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Fascinating. I love it. And so I could see all sorts of studies being done to try to answer those types of questions, because I think those would be, if you can get to the idea of where does the protection, if you will, from that rigid strategy help you out, and where does it start hindering, if we can try to identify those tipping points, if you will, I think it's going to be a huge boost to clinicians and to researchers trying to really tackle this issue. It's just fascinating.
Absolutely. If you're once able to reliably identify those different motor control phenotypes. So I fully agree. Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's get to another paper then. Or actually, you know what? I wanted to ask you, this paper was, had, no pain. The participants had non-painful pressure applied to them, we'll say. Do we know what painful pressure might appear like in the brain? Or have people with other types of pain been subjected to studies like this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good question, which I can't answer, mainly because of the head motion problem we observed in the scanner by applying pressure forces. So by increasing the pressure force in pilot projects, we observed severe head motion, and we were not able to detect or separate true activation patterns from confounding head motion patterns induced neural activity. So furthermore, applying posterior anterior pressure and looking at brain activity is, despite its clinical relevance, quite a dirty approach, as we move or stimulate different paraspinal tissues and also target different mechanoreceptors in different tissues. So this was also one of the limitations of this study, and we therefore radically changed the stimulus to be more specific, in particular regarding the activation of different mechanoreceptors. So based on this, we changed to, or due to this, we changed to vibrotactile stimulation, because as mentioned, vibration can be a powerful stimulus, and evidence shows that 80 hertz vibration is able to modulate muscle spindle activity and therefore proprioceptive input. On the other hand, we can use a control stimulus such as 20 hertz hertz, which should mainly target mechanoreceptors in superficial skin layers. So for this, in the last 3 years, we, together with the Lucerne University of Applied Sciences, we developed an MR-compatible pneumatic vibration device. We call it Pneuvid, which is able to stimulate the back along the thoracolumbar axis with different frequencies. So using this methodology, for the first time, I think we are able to establish detailed cortical maps of tactile and proprioceptive input of paraspinal afferents. And we already performed pilot experiments in healthy subjects, and first findings are really promising as we found distinct activation patterns in subregions of the sensory motor cortex. So it seems that with vibrotactile stimulation, we are far better regarding specificity if you compare it to the anterior posterior pressure. And so the next step would be, of course, to acquire more data, also in low back pain patients with different symptoms duration, to test if those maps differ between patients and healthy controls and how they relate to the motor control strategies we identify in the movement lab.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent. And you mentioned, how difficult it is to do this kind of research, but it's just so important. And finding ways around some of these issues, like the vibrotactile, is a smart way to get around some of these issues, to keep the head still and yet still get to the ultimate answer that you need, and we need it. So keep it up.
Yes, yes. It's also it's more comfortable for the subjects because they are lying in supine position, or with anterior posterior pressure, they are lying in prone position. And it was really a challenge because we had to develop a special pillow that they can breathe normally. So it induces also a lot of stress in the MR scanner.
Fascinating.
In prone position, right? So now it's very comfortable for them.
Yeah. Well, that's good. All right. Well, let's get into our last paper here, and this is about fear avoidance beliefs and how they're associated with reduced lumbar spine flexion during object lifting in pain-free adults. And this is in the journal Pain, and just published here in the summer 2021. So could you guide us through this paper, Michael?
Yeah, sure. So the background for this study was the observation, and this has been nicely shown in other studies, that there are still strong beliefs in the general population about the lifting technique. So lifting with a rounded back is generally considered as dangerous or even a cause for low back pain, whereas lifting with a straight back is considered as the safer technique. And although recent evidence shows clearly that there is no association between the lifting technique and the incidence of low back pain. So in support of those beliefs, it has been shown that that low back pain patients exhibit less lumbar range of motion during lifting when they have strong beliefs about the lifting technique. So the more harmful they perceive lifting with a rounded back, the less lumbar range of motion during lifting. And this has been interpreted as a protective strategy to protect the back from further pain and injury. So that's the background. And in this study, we were interested if such an association between lifting beliefs and spinal motion already exists in healthy, pain-free subjects. And such an observation would indicate a specific relationship between psychological factors and spinal motion in the absence of pain. So pain-free people came to our movement lab and performed daily activities such as lifting, running, walking, going up the stairs, chair rising, and so on. And in this study, we were specifically interested in spinal motion during lifting, of course. And we used a 20-camera Viken system to track the motion of the thoracolumbar spine with high resolution. Prior to spine kinematic assessments, people were asked to fill out several pain-related fear questionnaires. And among these, they filled out the FODA questionnaire, which includes pictures of daily activities. And people had to rate those pictures according to the perceived harmfulness for the back. And we were specifically interested in one item, one picture, showing a person lifting a weight with a rounded back. So coming to the results, first of all, we were surprised about the high variability regarding the ratings of this, let's call it FODA lift item, round back beliefs, which is in line with the evidence that such lifting beliefs already exist in the pain-free population. And we then performed regression analysis to test for potential linear relationships between those rounded back beliefs and spinal motion during the lifting behavior. And what we observed was a negative relationship between those, let's say, rounded back beliefs and lumbar motion. We did not observe such a relationship in the thoracic spine. So to conclude, the stronger those beliefs in pain-free subjects, the less lumbar flexion they showed during lifting. So this result suggests an association between lifting beliefs and lumbar motion in the absence of low back pain, which might be relevant.
Huh. Yeah. That is, wow. I love these kind of studies because, the literature, as you said, suggesting, no relationship between the posture and future injury, for example. And so then you show people, pictures of things, and you show them a picture of flexing forward, and then they're the people that don't move a whole lot, have more of that rigid control, it seems. It's fascinating. I mean, It really is. I'm just going to read for everybody one description in your discussion section. I thought it was fascinating, so I'm just going to go ahead and read it. It says the reduced lumbar flexion during lifting is likely achieved through altered neuromuscular activation and coordination consistent with reports describing a protective response, i.e. a tight control strategy, characterized by stiffening lumbar segments through antagonistic muscle activation. In patients with low back pain, such as a protective strategy has been suggested as being beneficial in the short term by avoiding further pain or injury. In the long term, however, maintaining this protective strategy has been linked with pro-nociceptive mechanisms, in other words, greater pain associated mechanisms for low back pain persistence through reduced movement, rigid motor behavior, and associated guarding with increased paraspinal muscle activation that may lead to increased spinal loading. That really, then again, I think full circle gets us back to the beginning of our conversation where you're talking about psychology and biomechanics, and that's certainly all playing in this particular paper, that the fears, just the observations, the visually looking at things and how subjects are interpreting, what's going on, and that they then manifest essentially opposite behavior. Wow. Where do we go from here on this stuff? This is neat.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. So I think now we can speculate that this observation might represent indeed a tight control strategy in pain-free subjects, right? So based on beliefs, which might become relevant in a future low back pain episode. And according to the models of Jaap van Dien and others, a tight control strategy, if persistent, might have negative consequences. So as mentioned, on spinal and supraspinal levels, maintaining low back pain. But I also think here this has been first to be systematically tested. So we use we just need a longitudinal design to test the causal effect, right? But it's a fascinating result. I agree. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So one one last question from this multidisciplinary treatment perspective. And we've talked a little bit about this already with how chiropractic care, or perhaps even exercise, physical therapy, and those sorts of interventions, how, modulating perhaps the proprioceptive aspects of things may get people moving a bit better, could perhaps modify any potential smudging that's going on. I wonder if you have any further thoughts on how these types of interventions may affect sensory motor control in ways that we haven't talked about, and or maybe some psychological or pain perspectives that you have on the issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we know that, chiropractic intervention works, and it's quite exciting to see the progress of chiropractic research with more and more upcoming findings regarding the underlying mechanisms on the spinal and supraspinal levels. I can only speculate now and share some hypotheses we aim to test. So let's assume that we can reliably identify a tight control strategy using our biomechanical approach. One assumption would be that this strategy would also be associated with a smudging of proprioceptive cortical maps in patients. And chiropractic intervention might help here to restore biomechanical and proprioceptive function in combination, of course, also with advice, for example, regarding unfavorable beliefs. And this might finally lead to a restoration of brain organization. However, with regards to brain organization of the back, here we are still at a very, let's say, basic research level, early level, as we have to evaluate first if those brain changes in sensory motor cortices represent a pathomechanism, or if they are simply an epiphenomenon because of the changed motor behavior, the changed sensory and motor output, right?
Right, exactly. And I'm just thinking about that paper still about people, these subjects looking at various pictures and whatnot. Now I think, I wonder if you do an intervention, would they change their perception of what may be so-called good or bad, and associated with their pain or fear. It's interesting. Without even looking at any motor control, would their perception change if they had some sort of care applied? I don't know, but there's so many questions that I think come out of this that I'm excited to read about your future studies, and perhaps if you're interested, we could have you back on the podcast at some point in the future to tell us about all the latest studies you've done by that point.
Yeah, sure. Would be happy to show those results if we have them. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So, Dr. Meier, a goal of this podcast series is to motivate and assist practitioners and students alike to pursue research careers in chiropractic science, or just, we'll say science in general, but specifically chiropractic science. Can you offer any advice to aspiring chiropractors or students who may wish to become scientists or researchers?
Oh, yes. So chiropractic research is an exciting area because there are so many open questions, which in my view can be best answered in an interdisciplinary environment, right? So my advice would be to look for a research team with a strong interdisciplinary focus. And there are so many chiropractic researchers out there with diverse backgrounds such as biomechanics, epidemiology, neurophysiology, psychology, and connecting those research teams with also clinicians makes this research area even more exciting and forms really the basis for better treatment options in the future for our patients.
Fantastic. Dr. Meier, I really appreciate you coming on the interview today. I think people are going to learn a lot from this interview, and there's a lot of exciting research that's going on, and your group is doing a masterful job. So thanks for all that you do.
Thank you very much, Dean, for inviting me.
That was a great interview with Dr. Michael Meier. I had a lot of fun and learned a lot in that interview. I look forward to bringing you more great interviews in the near future.